Welcome, welcome, everyone. Really odd to be on a Thursday, but I'm so excited about having Brooke here from Musical Breathwork that we did a special occasion show. So, as you know, I am passionate about all things dealing with connecting mind, body, and spirit. And Brooke has some beautiful ways of connecting that way. And we've got some really good conversational topics to get into. And Brooke, welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us how you got to where you are today.
Oh, that is such an adventure of a story. But I'm Brooke. I guess the short version would be when I was 12, I was privileged to have such an amazing musical teacher. And that musical teacher got me started on the breathwork journey. I didn't know that. But I often see breathwork as the gateway drug to singing. And when you love to sing and then you relax a little bit, you get really into chanting. And then in chanting, there's a lot of things that happen all by itself. When I was in college, I played golf at a D1 level. So like for in college athletics, it's pretty solid. And I went to, anyway, I had such a privilege playing under somebody named Coach Joan Joyce, who is a total rock star in the softball world and in the WNBA. And in golf, she set a Guinness Book of World Records that just got beat like 7 years ago. And she got me so much looking at everything in life as sequence. She was such an amazing athlete that across 4 different sports, she's in 4 Hall of Fames.
Wow.
She picked up golf at 40 and then 2 years later played on the LPGA tour. And this is one of the most difficult sports acknowledged in worldwide athletics. And she made it look so simple. And it was through sequence. So my choir teacher taught me sequences of breathing powerfully. And my college golf coach taught me sequences of, telepathy. Like golf is really, you're controlling your will, and you're doing that through visualizing the art of trajectory. You're playing with the wind. You're playing with the spin of a ball, which is very spirally through the wind. And all of these sequences have really marinated in me to a point where that's how I want to view everything in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So health to me, I had the privilege of marrying an amazing doctor and divorcing the same amazing doctor. And in the meantime, we actually built a healthcare center together, and it was all around education. And his big message was doctor in Latin means to teach. So I ran the meditation classes on Wednesdays and taught people about the sequence of humanity within the scope of archetypes, which I'm very passionate about, and how, us humans are just like the bees. So before the information age and telephones, when we were separated by mountain valleys and rivers, we kept propagating the same sequence of humanity over and over and over. And if you were a philosopher who spoke a couple languages and you had the ability to travel and read books, you'd go over the mountain Alps, and come into another isolated village and see the same setup of people sharing resources, the engineer building houses, the witch at the end of the woods knowing where the medicinal plants were, the monk in the neighborhood that was, mystical and perhaps lived by himself, and the artist that would roll through. Like, we as humanity are living in a sequence.
Absolutely.
It's never ending, this beautiful loop that we're in. So we might as well get good at it. But what I was able to see with him in facilitating so many health lectures and witnessing so many health lectures. So I'm not classically trained in medical science. I'm a international business with a minor in Spanish. My accreditation from school and university is very much tailored to, I thought I was going to be a professional golfer.
Right.
And in college, when I was graduating, I actually had a pretty intense spiritual journey with 5 friends passing away during the same month of senior year. So like senior year, if you're a college golfer, big deal. That's that last month of tournaments you play is what you take to your sponsorship. So it really sets you up as a pro if you crush. I did not crush. But the last 4 tournaments, I would fly, I would play. I'd come home, I'd take an exam, and then I would go to a funeral. And then I did the same thing the next week, and then the next week, and then the next week, and 5 weeks of literally playing a tournament, coming home, taking an exam, and then immediately going to a funeral. And I felt like I was waterboarded by the Reaper. And it made me just shift my desires. I thought I wanted to chase a little white ball around the world. And instead, I just wanted to be with my family. I wanted to be in my garden. I wanted to be with my animals. So it shifted the goal, that the Reaper tends to do that.
Right.
Reprioritizes these things that we think we want.
Right.
So it's been an interesting journey to where I'm at. And what I see now, this pattern so clearly, is the stress loop and how people are stuck in the stress loop, and how breathwork, particularly in Europe, is taught at a hyperventilating sequence. So a breath rate of about 40 to 60 breaths per minute. And this induces a stress system response within the body. And I was describing to somebody, because this whole time I've been teaching breathwork for a decade. It's a joy of mine. And as a singer, it always keeps me in good shape. So I can't party hard if I'm teaching every week. And it's a great joy to do it.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I kind of feel like this is just the journey, kind of unwinding. When I added fascia, the breath work really shifted for people. It made the breath work stronger.
Absolutely. And everything is energy, and energy can't be created or destroyed. So in a way, you're teaching people how to manage their energy.
Not lose it.
Right?
Or not get it.
Yeah.
The way that I've been trying to describe it to people lately is like, we are mostly liquids and gases. And these liquids and gases are moving through tubes. And when we're healthy, these tubes are moving and flowing all the time. And in a biomechanical perspective, these tubes are moving liquids and gases. In an energetic perspective, they're actually moving an electrostatic liquid that changes with voltage. There's a reason why we can create electrostatic shock and our hair stands up on end. This voltage is actually more animate within us. And I really feel like this next phase of healing arts, like Ida Rolf, we can pay a lot of respect to. She brought massage therapy really into the healing arts by taking up the science, by really having people take in what is physiology, how these tissues are moving. But it's been 100 years now. And I really feel like this level, if we just keep playing with tensegrity structures, sounds, light prisms, and magnets, we're going to be able to conceptualize really how big this field is and how coherent. I feel like I'm teaching brain-body coherence.
Yeah.
If people want to meditate, you got to take your body with you.
Yeah.
It's a whole radio tower. If we can just access the channel through our brain, there's only so deep we're going to go. But if we can bring this whole radio tower with us and then anchor the fiber optics into the earth, because our electron field is operating and flowing the way it is, that's where I think our next jump is supposed to be.
Absolutely. I love it. You're speaking my language. You had mentioned something about, so you were saying you were adding the fascia. What was the trigger for you to add the fascia into the mix?
So I have been training since I was 15. I love changing up training regimens. So I'm doing my normal hardcore training regimen, and I hurt my foot. And I went to my naturopathic doctor, and I was like, listen, my foot hurts, fix my foot. And he's like, it's not a foot problem, it's a fascia problem. And it's starting from your calf. And the onslaught of questions after that, it just threw me down a rabbit hole. But I fixed my foot. It took me 10 days, and the foot pain was gone. And the pain wasn't where I thought it was. It was more of a tension issue. So a lot of times people don't realize, but when our fascia is in a spider web shape. It's actually in a icosahedron shape is how I would describe it, because it's a collapsing structure. Yeah. So when we have an issue on this side, it's just tension. It's going to tear a hole in this side, just like our jeans do. When we wear them all the time, imagine our fascia is like our favorite pair of jeans. So wherever that's torn, it's going to tear in the body. And then if we know how to brush out the tension, everything returns. So to me, aging is kind of a little bit of an illusion, because it would be normal and natural if we have tension all over the place for us to feel constricted. And when we know how to open this back up, there's freedom. So after I started realizing how powerful this technique was, I really dove into the science of how can I work with it better? How can I get better results? How can I work with how the fascia cells actually secrete this fluid? What is this fluid? What is electrostatic? What is piezoelectric? And that, all of these unending curious questions of what do you mean fascia is polymorphic? And there's only, 10 research clinics out there really discussing it, and everybody else is terrified.
Right?
What's going on? While they're busy discussing the vocabulary they want to use around it, I'm going to figure out how to recondition it in the body. And there's already some people. Coach Chong Z, to me, is a leader in the fascia industry. He's so not big, but his secret of athleticism theories about ground force reaction align with everything that I've learned as a golfer. And he's really specializing in this piezoelectric chain between the foot and the glute and the pelvic floor. Whereas I feel like I'm really specializing in the chain reaction between the breath and the fascia releasing. And how they play together. So like if I teach someone only breath work, I can optimize their lung field, teach them to clean their lungs, get them to double their lung capacity. And I'm cocky at it at this point. I'm like, 6 weeks, like we can double your lung capacity because it's just a science. It's about following the sequence, and the sequence works for you. Absolutely. And when you see the sequence, you're like, oh yeah, this sounds very logical. Let's just do that. And then it works. And then with the fascia, so if they only do breath work with me, I can take them into brainwaves, but their body's going to hold tension. So I can bring their brain to a spot, but like if the body's tight, there's only so deep they can go. So if I take them through a fascia, and this is what I started to play with in the breath work. This was my breakthrough, is I was like, hey guys, let me show you this cool fascia thing I'm learning. And they were so deeply relaxed by the time we did the breath work, everybody was out of their body. And I'm like, okay, that's never happened. 100% of people. Exited, like got to theta where they relaxed outside of the body. And I'm like, all right, let's do this again. So 9 months later, I took it online because I'm like, you guys, this is a secret. If we bond these two things, the brain change. And it's because it's coherent. Of course. They exist together.
Right. And nobody talks about the fascia, but you're absolutely right. And then talking about, because I've done active sports, rock climbing, heli skiing. I've done all these things as my active meditation in life.
That is serious.
And I'm constantly like loving my fascia. Like I can tell when something's tight, but I'm super connected to the body because of these things I've done, right? Because I have to be aware of everything. So it's been a beautiful gift of that. And then I've always said to people, you have more hairs on the bottom of your lungs than you do on the top. And those hairs flood your body with oxygen. So when you're shallow breathing, anxiety is going to be easier, stress. So it's really beautiful. I have not dove into it per se. But I definitely, my first thing, I'm consciously breathing all the time now. It takes, once you start, right? You can start with a timer or sticky notes just to remember, let's breathe deeper, let's expand, let's be conscious. But it's pretty phenomenal that once you even integrate proper breathing, right? And not even a full breathwork session, but just some regular breathing, how much easier it is to manage your emotions, how to manage your perspective, to become the observer, because your body's not in this fight or flight response.
Yeah, that fight or flight response will never overcome. It's in 2 seconds. So we get cut off on the highway, and then it's boom, the whole body responds. And it's about 4 minutes to pull the body back into a state of rest. And the way that I teach kids how to do it, right, because it's always about communicating the message in 100 different ways, is to hum. And I always tell people we're built to breathe through the nose, never the mouth. And when you look at the cross section of a face, it becomes very obvious how much the nose is built. However, mouth breathers, they don't feel like they have enough opening in there, but you don't realize when you tone tissue expands. And when your tongue placement is right, you actually suction cup the back third of your tongue and you pull down this little muscle and cartilage, and it's like it opens the airway passage back here a little wider, and you can actually hear this wave. And in the advanced technique, I teach the shape of the breath. So most people, they just fill their lungs, right? What they don't realize is they're filling the same pocket of the lung tissue over and over. So when, you know, you have a human cadaver and they cut the body open, you'll see parts of the lung tissue very clean and other parts have particles all over it. And then even some parts of the lung have impressions left by the rib cage. And the standard untrained lung can hold about 5 to 7 cubic liters of air. So if you took one big breath, you'd be able to blow up a balloon with that much air in it.
Yeah.
If you're around 1 minute breath hold, it's about 5 cubic liters. If you're at a 90-second breath hold, you're at like 7 cubic liters. But the world record holders are at 22 cubic liters.
Wow.
People don't realize our lung capacity is so huge. Our lungs are made of 500 million alveoli, and they're like little spongy balloons. And they actually can keep, you know how when you can blow a balloon and then you blow it to its maximum and you're like, wow, it's going to pop, but then it doesn't. Our alveoli do the same. So if we can actually get the muscles out of the way of the lungs continue to expand. So I try to tell people, listen, my goal is to get your lung capacity to 14 cubic liters. And we can do that with safe training by focusing not on lung pressure, which is like a big issue with a lot of the lung tools out there, like train your breath and it's all mouth breathing. And it's based on like you're pressurizing, which I'm not a fan of. I'm a fan of understanding the muscles that pump the lungs are actually the diaphragm and the intercostal. So the diaphragm is a U-shaped pump. And when you see pictures of it, you're like, oh, I get this. The diaphragm itself drops down and the lung tissue opens up. Well, most of us, particularly us women, have held our tummies in so much.
Right.
Like the idea of pushing it down is like, what do you mean you want me to push it down? And what I tell people is that you're depriving your body of an internal organ massage. So every time our diaphragm works properly, it actually comes all the way flat and it pushes on the lumbar, the outsides of the rib cage, and the sternum. So there's actually a shape to this. So instead of just inhaling, right, we are supposed to inhale and fill the lower lung tissue all of the way. When that's full, we inhale more. And I like to say you fill the back, sides, and chest. There's a Fibonacci wave built into our physiology.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it starts with the nose. The tongue is lifted. Then we inhale through the whole nose. And there's actually, when you start to pay attention to the tiny little details, there's subtleties of inhaling through the lower, the middle, and the upper nose. I barely ever get to go into detail about that.
Yeah.
But our olfactories live at the top of the nasal gland. So when we have our tongue lifted in the right position and we're exploring the depths of our tongue, we're actually activating different things in the body. And then as we inhale properly and fill the front of the low belly, we have no lung tissue in the low belly, but that's the muscle to drop. Then we fill the back, then the sides, then the front. That's our maximum capacity. And when we exhale, it's the reverse of that. And by doing so,
Beautiful.
We're using the muscles right? We're optimizing the full capacity of the lung field. And when we're holding out, we're teaching our intercostals to come back online. We have 3 layers of intercostals. That's why we have so much torso rotation. But people don't really feel like they can control these, and we can. We actually can pull them out and push them in. And when you start to gain that control and sensation again, as a singer, you actually learn to push down. And that's what gives us the most control over our exhale, our valve pressure. So to me, the breathwork masters for breath holds all go to the free divers. The free divers train so specifically to hypoxia. It's like I honor that. You can't even train without going 20 feet underwater. When we go 20 feet underwater, our lungs are smushed in half because of the pressure. So the way that the free divers train is so cool. The Boudico breathing, I think they nailed it. For every respiratory illness and asthmatics, their case studies are just gorgeous. But for inhale control, like inhale power and exhale control, that goes to opera singers and power metal singers.
Wow.
They have, and like some rappers actually like can really pay attention to like nose breathing while they're in flow. Some saxophonists I would definitely include in that for sure. But I kind of feel like my lane is in this controlling the exhale and creating powerful inhales.
Beautiful. And then
Yeah.
blending it with the fascia to connect in a different way with the body, right?
Well, I'm seeking gamma brainwaves, and en
Mhm.
route, I'm going to share my journey because I feel like that psychedelic realm that so many of us have gotten to experience, particularly if you were in a silent, quiet, sacred space, I feel like you have the privilege of seeing the fractal universe and the geometry of what connects the stars. And when you have that experience, no one A can take it away from you, and B, you see that everything is connected. There is a resonant relationship that looks very icosahedronish to
Yeah.
everyone around us. And I actually feel like the fascia replicates that so much better than anything. Like it's kind of like mycelium and
Yeah, I get it.
fascia.
I talk to the mycelium all the time. Oh, guys, how's it going in there? Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible once you know something, you cannot unknow it. I keep saying that to people. You just can't unknow it. So this is why I believe that we're meant to be ever learning about whatever we're drawn to. So you said, once you learned about this, it was like, so now your foot injury was actually a gift.
Oh yeah, isn't that the blurs of life? It's the blessing, curse, blessing,
Yeah.
blessing. Like, could you give it back and be the same? Nope. So you got to keep it.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. I love your journey. So I found you on Instagram and a lot of breath work. So having been with Mind Valley, I've done a bit of Wim Hof. I'm like, yeah, it's not really my thing. Right? It feels forced. And I've done some, I can't remember what it's called, some of the breathing with a friend of mine who's a shaman, but also follows some of the Indian traditions around yoga poses and doing that breath and up through this nose and then this one this many times.
Pranayama stuff, yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I'm like, and that was quite a while ago. I'm like, that doesn't resonate either. So when I was following you, I'm like, yes, this, because it was that deep connection and how the body to work with it versus just focusing on the actions, which I'm like, I feel like I'm doing a textbook thing, right?
Yeah.
So nobody was explaining the fundamentals as to why we would do that or what was the benefits of doing that for the body. Yeah.
The natural resting breath pattern is 15 to 25 breaths a minute. And to me, that heavily correlates with the standard beta wave pattern, which is how fast our neurons are talking to each other. When we're in beta, we're talking, we're highly functional, we're moving around. So if we would exchange the word anxiety for high beta, I think it would immediately give us more control. Because if we're in a state of anxiety, our brain waves are probably close to 25 to 30 hertz. And our breath rate is probably close to 25 to 30 breaths a minute.
Interesting correlation.
Yeah. And I wish it was that easy. Do you mind if I actually show you something?
I don't mind. Please do.
Cool.
You can do all the show and tell you want.
Yay! I love show and tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so are you ready to put it on the stage? I'll pop it up.
Oh, yes, now I am.
Okay, perfect. There we go.
So my goal with teaching the breath to people, but the breath is just a part and the fascia is just a part because there's this whole other experience that is as humanity, as a seeker, right? I want to push this boundary of gamma brainwaves and to break that down a little bit. Gamma brainwaves is a meditative state that the Tibetan monks are living in for 8 hours a day. But us Americans are only experiencing it a half second to 1 second about every 6 weeks if we're lucky. Yeah. And the way that we describe this to each other when they have us plugged in is we feel like we've solved the problem that's been vexing us. We feel an intuitive download. We feel like we came up with a new creative idea. Now, gamma brain waves is 30 to 100 hertz. It's essentially when our brain is working at a symphony-like level. Now, these neurons are usually operating, communicating to each other on what I call beta brain highways. So this is muscle memory routine. When you're brushing your teeth, when you're making your breakfast, when you're doing routine, like perhaps driving to work, right? When you're driving to work, are you even thinking about the route? You're
Nope.
just, you're planning your day. And that's because of these beta highways. So they're highly functional, but we're not very present. But so this gamma is where we are when we're tripping. This is the sacred connection to all new things. New neuron highways are being built. Our mind is creative and adaptable, flexible, and we can see infinite solutions to problems. Now, if this equation that we're talking about, right, if the rhythm of our breath equaled the frequency of our brain waves, we could hyperventilate and reach gamma. But that is not what happens. So what happens is when we hyperventilate after a period of time, and it usually is, it depends on people, but let's just say around 4 minutes, we trigger our stress response. And the reason why that happens is because of the way we're built. Like everything's in a pattern, right? So sperm and egg come together. At this juncture point, the brainstem is formed. Now, the brainstem is actually underneath the R brain, the reptilian brain that people know what it is normally. It's this space at the base of the skull, right? And at the base of our skull, this brainstem, you can kind of picture our brain like a flower and our nervous system like a root system that's relaying information back and forth from our outside world to our inside world. Now, at the base of the brainstem's divided into 3 separate parts: the pons, the midbrain, and the medulla oblongata. And I'm always like, the medulla oblongata is the most famous, but nobody knows what it does or where it is.
Right.
But it's at the bottom of the brainstem, and it controls our heart rate variability and our breath rate, as well as our facial expressions, and a couple other things. But I always feel like it's actors and actresses, when they control their facial expressions, they are really in control of a lot of different things inside of their body. Just a little side note.
And I just noticed that there's a pyramid. And then
I don't know where you're looking.
bottom left, when I'm facing it, there's a pyramid. It says pyramid, bottom left corner.
Oh, yes.
Anyways,
Yeah.
I'm in Egypt. I've been in Egypt. I do retreats in Egypt. So I'm like,
oh, cool. Oh, that word even like pops out for you. I love it.
Right.
So the brain stem and the skin are actually created out of the same tissue when we're in the embryo. So just like a side note, I love thinking that our skin is so much more animated and alive and storing memory than people realize. Like when someone you love touches you, you know it's them. How does that happen? You know, when your cat brushes your leg, how do you know it's your cat?
Right.
That information stored, like when you step on your bath mat and all the lights are off, but you know exactly where you are.
Yeah.
So our brain is just such a cool thing, made of 2 types of cells. The glial cells, neuroscience has this cute little argument about it. Some of them are like, they nourish the others, the neurons, and other neuroscientists say like, well, we're not really sure. That's a little bit more, we don't really know. So I like to just remind myself and other people that even though we've been studying the human body, we still have mystery boxes within ourselves. And I really feel like if we just hunker in on patterns for a while as a society, we can see patterns. If we focus in on disease, we're going to see disease. If we focus in on chemicals, we're going to see chemicals. But if we can take this approach of pattern, put everything through a pattern filter, I really feel like we'll start to see connections between things. So these neurons, right, you see these little wrinkles. I like to consider the wrinkles like beta highways. Like this is our muscle memory. Like this is how a guitar player learns how to play a song because he does it 200 times. We learn the route to school because we do it 200 times. This is like just how we're built. Now, when we live in beta too long, Tanja, this is the problem that I want to fix. Is when people say I'm anxious and I'm high stress and I'm anxious, you have an option to say instead, oh, I'm high beta. Well, what do you need to get out of high beta? We need to slow your breath rate down. But remember the conundrum of the breath rate, it's not exactly correlated because if we hyperventilate, right, we can actually pop the body into the state of stress. And that's because of the medulla oblongata. So when the medulla oblongata is, when we increase our breath rate, our heart rate's going to increase. going to trigger the brain to say, oh, I guess we're preparing for battle.
Right.
And then the immune system turns off, the digestive system turns off. And that's the stress response. And to me, people have these elaborate de-stressing tools. I think smokers are actually the best of it. I'll actually see a smoker light a cigarette and visibly sigh before they even take a drag of it. And I'm like, they're already doing the work, because what turns our stress system off is deep breathing. So like if you scare someone from behind a door, the immediate response, mouth breath into the upper chest. That's our immediate primitive response to stress. When you see someone relax, it's a deep sigh. So people who drink wine, right? This is kombucha, but people who drink wine, sometimes I see them settle into the couch with their glass of wine and they're just, the wine's just a placebo from a deep sigh.
Right.
For some people, it's their favorite pajamas. So we have our tools anchored around slowing our breath rate down. For some people, it's a bathtub. For some, it's a walk outside. But all of these circulate around our breath rate. So here's these monks that we get to have the opportunity to just call, right? That's amazing. Like 100 years ago, they couldn't just call Tibet and say, hey, can we study your brains? What are your guys' neurons firing at? So there's this funny experiment that happened that I love telling this story if you have the headspace for it.
Of course.
So these neuroscientists, they had funding, they were studying the brain waves. And the way that they study brainwaves is through sound. So they would have people come in and sit, and they hook them up to the EEG. And the EEG looks like this. So this is an old school electroencephalogram. And these are tiny little microphones. So there's nothing being emitted. They're just listening. And they were per pattern. So after a handful of 1,000 people, they were like, okay, this is the pattern we see. And it doesn't base on where we're from or the language we speak. These are just the sound waves that kind of keep repeating over and over. They did find out that all of our brains are unique. However, we have things that, are similar to each other. So when we're in deep sleep, we're experiencing something called delta. Delta's here at the bottom. This is 0.1 to 3 hertz. So our brain's pretty relaxed, right? Theta is 4 to 7. This is where we live as children from the ages about 2 to 7. Yep. And in theta brainwaves, our neurons are creating new connections together. I call this the imagination space because our neurons can off-road and create new connections. Alpha brain is a space of intense focus, right? Usually when we're experiencing alpha brainwaves, our eyes are closed and the brainwaves are firing at the back of our brain in the occipital lobe. And that's actually where we have vision. So our eyes are closed, but we are telling the neurons what we want them to do. So this is a lot like guided meditation. This is like what Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton teach, right? But in alpha, to me, we're not quite dropping in because there's this thing that happens when you hang out in theta. And I think all of us have memories of this as children when you're playing with your friends and you have officially transformed the playground into a pirate ship.
Right.
You are fighting off pirates. You are not on a playground.
Right.
Now in theta, we can make this jump to gamma brainwaves. All right. And now remember this gamma brainwaves, they were barely acknowledging it in neuroscience. Like they were like, okay, we experience alpha when we're doing this. Beta is when we're functioning, when we're talking. When people are stressed, they're a little bit higher on that range. When people are just driving their car and drinking a cup of coffee, they're in the lower part of that range. And then occasionally we would blip into this gamma and they were like, oh, it's gone. So they were kind of just starting to acknowledge it as a pattern, but not really something we sustained. Again, it would only come up for a half second to 1 second. But do you see how that squiggly line in gamma is a little more rhythmic and a little more even than the beta one?
Right.
A little more sing-songy, a little more balanced.
Yeah.
Well, they had extra funding, these neuroscientists, and they got tired of studying American brains. So they made a phone call to the monks. It's a handful of monasteries out in Tibet. And I can only imagine that phone call. Like you got to have a translator. right, on the phone. And then how do you tell them, like, what they asked for was their best monks and they wanted to study their brain.
How do you label somebody a best monk?
Yeah, that was my first question. I'm like, well, how do they discern that? So they ended up doing it by time. So they sent the monks that had more than 62,000 hours of meditation, which to me, that means that they sent the old guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
They just sent the old guys, the guys that have been there the longest.
Yeah.
When they hooked those guys up on the EEG, which, like, could you imagine being a fly in that room? It's only going to be a little bit sticky on your head, sir.
Right.
You know, because they have to put a gel down. And so they found out that these monks were living in gamma. It changed neuroscience. This experiment blew out of the water. They literally quantified a dimension that we're not tapping. So they asked a series of questions to the monks, like, okay, all right, what does this even feel like? You guys are literally living in a brainwave frequency that we barely touch. And they described it as being wide open and ready for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that I perceive that, that's how you explain the present moment.
Right.
You know, like, okay, so we're present, right? But these are also men that were trained in meditation, right? Highly trained in breath. That's what people don't realize, is when you get past point A with the breath, when you understand the muscles, you can feel the muscles, you've developed a little bit more flexibility in the muscles so you can start to control it. You actually can break the breath instead of into an inhale, exhale, you break it into a 4-part inhale. So you're filling up certain spaces of your body in sequence, which is bottom up, right? Then when you exhale, you're releasing it bottom down with a Fibonacci shape. So you're actually exhaling from the forward top, then the sides down, then the full back, then the back belly, then the front belly. And when we learn this sequence and we train this sequence, which is very easy to do, the first thing we have to do is clean your lung field, because we only get 2 sets of sponges in here. So we got to keep these sponges clean. It's a very easy technique to do. It's pretty brutal for people, but I love making them do it because it moves the lymph, it moves the blood tissue, it starts to tone your nasal glands. If you have a weak esophagus or an esophagus that's been impinged, we start to tone that. We accidentally train the powerful 1-second inhale. Then we strengthen and make flexible the muscles that pump the lungs. And this sequence that I teach only takes 10 minutes. But what I'm teaching people to do is double their lung capacity. Because when we double your lung capacity, we drop your breath rate in half. And to me, the real secret sauce is if we can breathe closer to 4 breaths a minute, we're operating within the constraints of our pleasure system. So we're keeping the body pulled into a parasympathetic pleasure system rest state by breathing at 4 breaths a minute. You can kind of handle chaos. If you're inhaling for 7 seconds and exhaling for 8 seconds, there's enough lapse of time within your body where you're not in stimulus reaction mode, right? And we can go way slower than that. But when we can get into theta and release the neurons when we're in meditation and release language, which is why I teach a musical cueing. I really believe music is going to help us bridge this gap. We can drop into a theta brainwave state and jump into gamma. So gamma doesn't happen by heightening, over-caffeinating, overstimulating, getting past that point of stress and delirium. It happens from a slowed, controlled state. And the inventors of the last 400 centuries knew this. Then they utilized it.
Yeah.
Tesla, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Albert Einstein, they all, when they had a problem, they didn't have cohorts to talk to. So they all had rituals built around, okay, I have this problem. I need to think creatively. I need to think creatively my 5,000th attempt on the same thing. And they would basically go take a nap. But they had this very specific nap routine, which to me is just another sequence, right? So Einstein famously hold his tennis ball. Tesla would rock back in his chair. And it's funny, there's like these images of Tesla where he has his hand like this and he's rocking back in his chair. And I'm like, that's him doing the lock-in thing. Yeah. So the way that these gentlemen would talk about problems is they would say, I would bring the problem to my mind, which I think is such a fascinating use of words. Because if we started looking at our brains as storage units, like little neuron building blocks that we build for creative potentiality, that
Mm-hmm.
is how we should look at the brain. It's not there for storing numbers. This is there for infinite creative power.
I fully
Numbers are cool.
wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. This is the Google engine that could never be recreated, you know? So by showing people this sequence, and these are just a few slides of my brain and breath connection course that I teach. And I love teaching this lecture because I get to break down some of the most interesting thoughts. And I'm really teaching basic physiology, basic biology, some very updated science of fascia. And my background in breath is so strong because I had an operatic training and a rock and roll style singer, and they both had disagreements in the breath. So I feel like I learned from the best of the best and they disagreed. So now I fused them.
There you go.
And I kind of
Open
feel
that
like,
bridge.
yeah, it's just like, oh, if we do both, then we have twice the power. And that's what I feel like in the breath. But when we look at it in a formula space, it has nothing to do with the breath. And it has nothing really to do with the fascia. It has everything to do with optimizing this radio tower that we have within us, right? The breath is like playing the strings of the body to me. And the strings of the body is the fascia. And how that comes out of us is our sound and our light and our brain waves. I don't know if that's a great job of explaining it, but that's how I am.
It makes complete sense to me.
Okay.
So let me just put it in layman's terms for everyone listening. When you focus on breathing properly,
Mhm.
which if you go follow Brooke on social media, you'll see a ton of it. And then you incorporate the fascia with it. You're connecting the mind and the body. And then by enhancing this and getting it to the level where you stay up there, you're actually connecting with spirit. So it is a mind, body, spirit practice, really.
I told I'm working with such an amazing team the team of people right now of making the website a little more intuitive and
Yeah.
making this material a little more polished. And they keep asking me about, what is this really about? And I'm like, man, I want to find gamma. Like, this has nothing to do with the breath. This has nothing to do with that. It's all about seeking gamma. And whatever we need to do in the process, no matter how many times this formula needs to change, gamma is there. It's quantifiable. This is where we're
Yeah.
going. Our meditations just aren't about controlling the mind. It's not just about feeling good and grounded. It's about empowering the voltage. Like, this is, to me, what we could call in the future electromagnetic frequency training, but the team did not go for that name. They were like, that doesn't come up in any SEO keyword search.
Right.
Like,
right.
yeah, of course it doesn't. Right. You're right.
It's something to do with the mind, body, spirit, though. And I absolutely adore because when people can understand, you can't do one without the other. Yeah, you can go and do some plant medicine and have an experience, but you can't stay
Right.
there, nor can you tap in super easily afterwards. So, in my experience, and I went through a plant medicine journey. It was highly beneficial for many things, especially connecting me with nature. I did some microdosing with that. But I've always said, no, you can do this without. It's a matter of once you can once you've seen it, then you know what you're looking for. And you can't unsee it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
always had this metaphor for truth. It's funny, you've mentioned it a couple times, so I want to share it. Where we have it, I used to tell people, I'm like, I feel like I have this rebar, like this piece of iron steel in the core of my person. And when truth hits it, whether I want it to or not, it just vibrates. And it's like sometimes you hear truth and you're like, oh, I am not ready for that. That is going to shake so much stuff out of my person.
Right.
And I feel like if people do plant medicine at the wrong time, it's
I
really
agree.
not healthy. But if they do it at the right time, I mean, I would never give any of my experiences back. I mean, they made me see so much more. And I think when you do it properly, you do it in the right space, when you do it in a sacred way, when there's sequence, forgive me. I did so much of my, particularly the initial 20 experiences. I had the privilege of being in a Native American church, adopted into them, and really got to see, I kind of went deep for a while. I lived in a teepee for a year. I did no phone for a year. I did no shoes basically for a year. I was like the white girl Pocahontas.
You're the all-in girl. I see you.
Yeah, I'm a little obsessive about my things. But I took it deep and I for a while, you know, and at the end of it, I remember that the last time I did a peyote, it was my first peyote ceremony, my last, and I had done IL. I sat like 16 times. February is like a microdosing month for me for mushrooms, and I like my little schedule. I feel like I'm respectful. I give time to integrate. I set my own intentions and make sure that like certain things are honored. I keep my energy clean before and then after. So it was so nice to be adopted into a church, a Native American church that had such ceremony and structure centered around those experiences. And in my last one, I saw so clearly that I had learned what I needed to learn from this style of getting into the divine, and I was ready to find another path. And it felt so cool. Like, I know that a lot of mystics, and students of the old sometimes get to the bottom of what they were looking for, and they pick up whatever's at the bottom and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to go over there now. And it was such a privilege to get there, like in my own way and in my own time. It was like a good 7 years of real involvement. And now I feel like I'm, you know, that's called the red road, and I feel like now I'm looking for the blue road. And what that meant to me at the time, and it's still an image that sits with me, is this other like Celtic conversation with nature. I'm like Scotch Irish in my blood, but not connected to that ancestry. And when I play the harp, my dad purchased a harp for me for my birthday last year. I've always wanted one, and I found this Celtic harp from Pakistan, and it's so cute, and it's 22 strings and something like good and easy to learn on. Well, when I got it, I knew how to play it. And I know how to play other instruments, so the patterns were the same. I knew where C was. I knew how to play the chords, but it was almost like this like I've lived with this instrument before. Me and this instrument. Yeah, and I feel like when we allow ourselves to relax into the infinite, eternal, electromagnetic nature of what we are, we can expand past this one avatar that we're playing in this reality. Like Brooke is a small spectrum in time of this other, whatever's animating this body has lived for a lot longer than just this body's been alive. And that's my real belief. And if we can make way for that, if we can relax from the biomechanical viewpoint into an electromagnetic viewpoint. Yes. And I feel like the gateway drug for that is crystals with people. Like when they start to get around geometric shapes that are influencing the structure outside of just of its body, we start to engage with a little more of a sensitivity with our nervous system. And science has proved over and over that 30% of people have this capacity to exist outside of the realms of their body. Now, we all do, obviously, right? But I think that study skewed because it probably just means that 30% of people have halfway decent fascia, and the electromagnetic charge of their nervous system is operating just outside of their body. So like, I think all of us have this capacity, but some of us are so tense within the structure that the waves get interfered because I mean, our nervous system, this picture on the right here, Tanja, there's only 4 of these in the world. This is a real body. So we're often shown the nervous system like this, and we look like a plasticated cauliflower, but this on the right, this is us. We're like a walking tree. Yeah. As we touch the earth touches our brain back. And if we can just keep ourselves out of high beta for a while, like imagine going a handful of weeks just in low beta, because like if you trigger it, you get cut off on the highway, in 4 minutes, you can pull your nervous system right back to a state of rest. So how creative can we be when we start taking accountability for the electromagnetic response? The brain stays in high beta. The tension of the frequency waves through the nervous system is going to constrict the fascia. And the nervous system ends, right, with 4 different types of mechanoreceptors. That's why we can perceive reality. The Merkel's discs are why we have fingerprints, and it helps us communicate back and forth, right? I want to show you with the fascia. The fascia is this brilliant scaffolding structure. It's essentially like a gluey spider web, and this is a collagen. So the fascia is made of collagen. Collagen is a triple helixed fiber, and the triple helix itself makes it a nanotubule. So these tubules, picture it like a tiny little straw.
Yeah.
So these straws, when we're healthy, are emitting fluid through it with no impingement. The fluid's just going, right? Now, these tubes are braided together, and as kids, they're just operating fine. And you can see this is an example of some of the less dense fascia. And this is still has like the liquid in it. So you see how like silvery and metallic and seemingly like a little bit
spiderwebbish.
So this is another image. You guys see how dense it is?
Wow.
So it touches everything. People are like, how can you tell the difference between a muscle knot and a fascia knot? I was like, well, fascia wraps every muscle fiber. So what do you think?
Right.
There is no separation. This is why I think this is why the doctors are having such a hard time adding it to their practice, because they were all taught the standard biomechanical viewpoint, which fascia is a connective tissue. We should just slice it if it gets in the way of surgery. And the more we slice, the more the body has to recuperate.
Right.
And this fascia is like a lasagna. So we can have old injury, right, that happens in our deep tissue. And then we heal up over it, but then we train on top of that. And then as this gluey nature, this knot happens down here, it's actually going to affect everything on top. So there's some really good research about how cellulite is actually just fascia adhesions. All cellulite.
Oh, that. Okay, go into that a little bit, because I'm really curious about that. That makes sense though, right?
Yeah, because if we're healthy fascia, right, is going to be how the Tai Chi masters actually have been describing it for years. And that is a honey-like fluid. And when this honey-like fluid is moving correctly, there's really no issues in the body. And it's when we sit a lot, right? So as we sit for decades, like we go to school, we get put in shoes that crush the phalanges of our toes. We have 26 bones in the foot, 4 bones in the whole leg. So the foot is very different. So imagine if we wore gloves all the time, okay? And we used our fingers like this. After about 10 years, you could expect that your dexterity and range of motion of your fingers is going to be like very limited and immobile.
Right.
And what happens is as we limit and immobilize, especially when we're developing, is there's this glue that happens in the fascia, because now the hoses aren't working the way they're supposed to because there's no movement.
Right.
Right. So there's a couple things inherently good for fascia: movement and heat. Because as we generate heat, the body releases acids, and it helps this fluid move within the body. Like we experience perspiration. But what I developed in my technique is a way to work with how the fascia cells itself secrete more fluid. So instead of taking the biomechanical approach, and there's so much good success with the biomechanical approach, I find it to be a little aggressive. Like I wouldn't want my grandma to be doing rolfing. I wouldn't want my grandma to be doing structural therapy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like maybe some myofascial release, but like pretty intense, because the way that this approach looks at the fascia fibers, right? They're not looking at it as an electrostatic change or current. They're looking at it as a knot within the fiber. So to break up the fibers, you just shear it or rip it. So like fascia flossing, and not to take anything away, the Graston method, like all of these have their benefits and they've helped people tremendously. All of those methods, for the most part, require a therapist. They're quite expensive.
Yeah.
And to me, this is a maintenance thing. Like my fascia changes. I just did a 3-week experiment on myself, actually. My fascia had gotten so optimal that when I was doing sessions, I was like hunting for something to like some sort of knot to find. So I was like, cool, I'm there. Let's see how long it takes for them to come back. So for 3 weeks, I did maybe just like a half an hour session on Wednesdays when I teach, but very minimal training. And right now, both of my knees ache a little bit. And it's because I did 3 weeks and I trained heavy. I trained like my normal self.
Yeah.
And danced a lot last weekend at a music festival on a beach. So I know that affected my knees a little bit. But then not training, all of a sudden the symptoms come back. So for me, I know even when the fascia is mostly optimal, it's still a maintenance routine, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, if you go to a therapist and get you get to point A, you still need to maintain. It's like going to the dentist and getting your teeth brushed and you're like, oh, I never need to brush my teeth again. It's like, no. Nope. That's not how that works. So
Yeah.
the biomechanical approach to fascia is we look at this, right? These are the main fascia bands. And this diagram comes from Tom Myers' book. Tom Myers is one of those researchers, not a doctor, that asked a lot of questions. He studied Rolfing. He studied tensegrity. I really love his approach. He stretches the body asymmetrically to create symmetry within the body again. And we're looking at these like tendons in a sense, like strong silver skin within the body. Now, when they find issues, they're going to stretch it out to create balance. When I find issues, I want to compress it because the way that I'm looking at the fascia comes more from a tensegrity approach. And tensegrity is a fancy word called tension and integrity. It was developed by this brilliant, handsome guy here, Kenneth Snelson. He was, check this out, Tom. You're going to love this story. I never go into this with like most people, and I just feel like you're going to love it. So when he was 18, he's in architecture college. And the teacher, right? Teachers never know how much they can change the world just by posing the right question. The teacher says, I want you to make your first homework assignment. I want you to make a sculpture out of toothpicks and string. And he created something known as Project X. And Project X inspired what we know of as tensegrity. And this is him 30 years later. He has one of the largest sculptures in Washington, D.C. I know there's a lot of sculptures in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
This is called the Needle Tower. And it's 6 stories high. And if you go underneath it, this is it. So he was playing with sacred geometric shapes when he was 18. So like the mandalas that you have behind you right now,
Yeah.
he was playing with making those out of toothpicks long before 3D printers.
Cool.
And his teacher that he turned the homework assignment into took that project and brought it to Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller and Kenneth Snelson became fast friends. And the two of them developed the word tensegrity. And this birthed the omnidirectional wheel. He invented this thing that he's holding here to replace our car tires. Yeah. So that we would have one tire or tires that could go in every direction. Still doesn't exist. And this is the he's the father of the geodesic dome. So when we take this approach, right, and this is what inspired the whole concept of fascia, because flash forward 20 years, so this is like 1960, this is all happening, between 1940 and 1960. Now, in 1980, Dr. Stephen Levin, he's a 26-year-old orthopedic surgeon, or probably not 26, probably a little bit older, but anyway, 1980s. He's at a medical conference. And right outside of this medical conference is one of Kenneth Snelson's sculptures. Okay. I love that. I just love how the universe throws ideas into our brain. And he goes to this museum and he looks at a daddy long neck dinosaur. And the biomechanical doctor in him looks at this dinosaur and goes, there's no possible way this dinosaur ever took a drink of water from a lake. He would never have the ability. There's not enough, the way the leverage is, there's not enough muscles. This biomechanically makes no sense at all. And that afternoon, he was in surgery, or a day later, and he was looking at the fascia tissue, and he had an aha moment where he combined this concept. He was familiar with Buckminster Fuller's and Kenneth Nelson work. And as he was looking at the fascia, he started thinking of their work. And it created this idea. And he's the father of the term biotensegrity. And this is him with one of the models he made of this human spine. And he's like, this makes so much more sense. We are not brick by brick stacked on top of each other. We have rotation. There's no bone on bone contact in the body.
Right.
It's fascia touches everything. We're spring loaded entirely. But this spring loaded mechanism, right? This is where the new science is bringing us. This spring loaded mechanism is actually relaying a current of fluid through it. And this current of fluid is perfectly structured water that's high, like it's electrostatic, it's piezoelectric, it's polymorphic, it's metaphasic. There's such a disagreement there. It does so many different things. It changes from solid to liquid. So this is an image of, on the right, a fascia adhesion. If you read the research, they'll call it fascia densifications. And in some articles, they call it fascial restrictions. In all cases, they're talking about the fascia being solid. Now, the way that a lot of the fascia release, 24 different fascia releases techniques out there, including my own, 22 of the 24, the way that they release this technique is by shearing that. Okay.
So shearing would be like rubbing something against it?
Yes.
Okay.
Rubbing something against it, kind of tearing it up.
Okay.
Moving it around. If you think of a Rolfing massage, they're pressing super deep and then breaking it up. So my comment on that is fascia release is having it, even if it's aggressive, is better for the body than not having it, right? Okay. The movement is good. Movement is health. We're just depending on the fascia to heal itself. That's all. So we're going to create an inflammation response in the fascia and wait for the fascia to heal. So when people say like, oh yeah, cupping is so good for the fascia, it's like, well, cupping creates a ton of bruising. Like I don't want my grandma doing cupping, particularly for, and it's cupping is really good for the blood flow, really good for the lymph, right? And it's pulling all this tissue. It's aggressive. It's aggressive on the skin. It only gets so deep under the body. And then they're treating often around the spine, which is something I avoid in my technique. I want your lower body to be released of 80% of the tension before we even touch the upper body. Because when you take the tensegrity approach, everything's based on the feet. Everything's based off of where the tension is created. So if somebody's got neck pain, that's fine. We're not going to touch your neck pain for months. Because if you have neck pain, you probably have a super intense lateral band because it's all connected. It's a fiber. So when I started diving into it, and I'm really kind of blown away that I'm even teaching this, but you know, minds are minds. And when I focus on sequences, it just becomes curiosity.
Right.
And this curiosity that I'm in is quite hopeful. It feels good. It feels fun to chase the bunny. So when I started looking at, okay, so this is, and the visuals really helped me. I'm like, okay, so if this is a fascia restriction, how do we turn it back into that? And how can I teach my grandma how to do it? Right. You know, and not that I like want to specialize in teaching grandmas, because like I really love what this can do for athletes. And there's so many athletes that have their ACL blown out, and dancers. And it kind of breaks my heart because, you know, you're a 30-year-old athlete. You shouldn't be done your career. You just have filthy fascia hygiene. And if I could show them this is how we do it without creating more inflammation in the body, we can restore youthfulness in liquid. So as I started to get into research, Carla Stecco, to me, I am her biggest fan. I am such a fangirl over that woman. She's an Italian doctor. Her medical lectures are absolutely brutal. If you don't have one of those like steel trap minds, it is like getting waterboarded by like very big words said in a very intense Italian accent. Yeah. But I almost feel like the translator for her work. Not that I'm replicating anything that she does, because all these doctors are still looking at the vocabulary of how it moves, what changes it, what creates the change. And as they're studying it, I'm trying to apply it functionally to my own body. So absolutely. I'm passing it through the athletic filter of how can I make this research work for me? And in really unpacking her stuff, I think it took about 20 research articles and a handful of books where I was like, oh, these are the conditions that must be met in order to move that solid structure to this liquid structure. And the thing about being in the information age is I can read the research that the Chinese doctors are coming out with, the German doctors are coming out with, and the American researchers are coming out with. And because I don't have an agenda, because I'm not defending any system at all, I just get to witness this confusing dialogue about how deeply this fascia runs into the cells. Like the fascia runs into the cells through something called integrins and wraps around the mitochondria. So like right now, cold plunge therapy is such a fad, right? Not a fan of it, just personally. Now, people love cold plunge therapy because it helps them lose body fat. Now, if you just ask a handful of questions, right, it helps them lose belly like fat because you are increasing the brown fat of the body, which ask another question. The brown fat is actually mitochondria that's been divided and dispersed through the system. So as you increase your mitochondria, which is an organelle that lives within the cell that burns sugar and glucose, it's our energy, it makes our ADP for everything, right?
Yep.
So the reason why, all right, one more layer, one more question. The reason why that happens is because of the fascia. The mitochondria can divide and move outside of the cell because of the fascia. This is all fascia related stuff. The healthier, the more liquid, the more conditioned the fascia is, the more optimal the nervous system is going to be, the more optimal our energy levels are going to be, the more voltage that we can actually handle in the body. Our electron uptake changes. When you get into Coach Chong Z's work, I mean, he's really hyper focused on the piezoelectric channel and how, in a sense, people could relate to it as fast twitch, right? So when you start to remove the layer of, as an athlete, right, of thinking of the muscles as isolated groups that you fast twitch, okay, that you fast twitch charge, and you start saying, okay, well, how can we build fascia strength? Because the nervous system operates at 275 miles an hour. What if we could operate the fascia relaxation and letting go through the fascia channels? Yeah, well, that ups you as an athlete. That ups your reaction speed, reaction time, like all of it. All of that changes.
And so, just like nerves in the body, it's like mycelium. It's carrying information constantly. Yeah, it's carrying information constantly. It's fascinating. So, there's something you didn't answer when we started this, so I just don't want to forget. How is this related to cellulite?
So if you look at this picture here of the fascia restriction, so this happens at different depths. And if you think of the back of your hamstring, which is where most women have fat or cellulite issues, right, in your glute, that we only have one bone in the entire upper leg. So if that's 4 to 5 to 6 inches of nothing but meaty tissue, if you have adhesions in there, right, it's going to pull on the outside skin. Now in the glute is like 4 to 8 inches of nothing but meaty tissue with no bone in the way. And it's embarrassing how, when I take people through class, how bad their glutes are. Like when you take care of the glutes, you're taking care of your hips, you're taking care of your knee, you're taking care of your low back tension. So people that want to focus on their neck, I'm like, yeah, but how are your glutes? How's your hip joint? How's your lateral band? The IT band area? There is this amazing research that Ashley Black came out with, and her, like me, not a doctor, just somebody trying to solve a problem for herself. She had early onset rheumatoid arthritis. Her story is really fascinating. She was a cheerleader. Her hands started to get stuck, and she was going to doctors, and the doctors are like, there's nothing we can do for you. Here's some medication. And she flipped them off and said, screw you. I'm finding, I do not receive that as an answer. And she found her own way, and she made this device. Initially, I think it was like golf spikes, PVC, and she just brushed out this. Now, her technique, because she was healing her hands, right? She developed something that to me doesn't go very deep in the body, and it's very brutal. It's again, it shears these and a lot of people have had great results with it. I didn't have the patience for it. It's an expensive prop, and it's not fun on the body. It leaves bruises. But with maintenance, you have great conditioning.
Right.
But to me, it doesn't get deep. And it's very hard to do your glutes and your hamstring, which is actually like the funnest part to do in my technique. And my technique is just, it's gentler. And we use compression with all of these certain conditions met in order to stimulate the fascia cells to create more of this fluid. And it just opens the impingements. And to me, it's way gentler. It's maybe not as fast as some of these others approaches, but it's gentle. And as a maintenance routine, even if they did these other methods as a maintenance routine, what I'm offering is to me, very like affordable and long-term.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So a couple other questions we've got. One is, so knee pain isn't bone on bone, it's stiff or hard fascia.
It depends on the approach that you want to take. Of course, if you ask a doctor, they're going to say what I'm saying is ridiculous. Osteoarthritis is a genetic thing. There's no conditions that can blah, 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 blah. But if you take the fascia approach, right, the synovial fluid in your knee, right? First off, the fluid that's in there is hyaluronic acid, and hyaluronic acid with certain conditions met can be prompted to be created in the body. We naturally make hyaluronic acid all the time. It's in our tears, it's in our saliva, it's in the juice that flows out of us when we're turned on. To condition the body to continue to make it past the age of 28, we just have to condition it. You know, I really believe our bodies are meant to age well. Now, if we have adhesions that have been in our calf, let's just say our calf and our shin for 30 years, okay? Mm-hmm. And we've never taken care of them. All of that fascia tension from the calf is pulling on the knee joint. Now, if it's not in the calf and the shin, right, it could just be from some people aren't familiar with muscle groups, but like the IT band, which is the space on the outside of your knee to your hip joint. If that's really tight, it's going to pull on the inside of the knee. So if you feel knee pain on the inside of the knee, you're being pulled from the other side. If you feel it on the outside of the knee, you probably have tension on this other side. And most people are getting messed up from the feet. Because if you can't move your pinky toe, if you have no mobility and separation and dexterity, if you can't lift your baby toes and keep your big toe on the ground, I can tell you for sure that not only is your brain lost connection to the foot, but your fascia is stuck. And if we don't take care of the fascia of the foot, we can only go so deep with the calf and the shin and the hamstring. And but knee pain alters. And I can't tell you how many clients I've had where they're like, oh, I'm only 2 weeks into your program and my knee pain's gone and it's been there for 10 years. And it's like, yeah, because it wasn't your knee. It was the fat, just like my foot. I didn't have
everything's connected. Everything's connected. Absolutely. Is there a way, so can you give a brief explanation of what you're offering as the fascia? Can you just explain like a quick overview?
Yeah, so I have 2 courses available on my website. My company is still in its infancy. We're in our toddler stage, but we're really getting there. I'm about to release a dynamic breathwork course, but right now on my website, I have a brain and breath connection. And that is a 75-minute lecture that's very illustrated that goes over how this pattern and loop between our brain and our breath and our fascia influences our stress response, as well as tools that we can do to overcome that immediately. As well as I go into what the fascia is, how we can start to treat the fascia. I do give a lot of value in that little $30
I know
course.
You do. I can. You're a didactic. Do you know what that is? A didactic?
No. What does that mean?
You're a lover of learning. Oh. And so you're picking up, you like a sponge, you consuming information and you remember it because you take it and put action to it. That's a didactic. That is a lover. A lover loves learning.
Yeah, definitely that.
Yeah. It's like Norma. So those in the over on Rumble there's a bunch in Rumble. That's cool. Another Norma sign, isn't it? Yeah. Nice. And then for the breath work, would that help with snoring?
Oh, for sure. So Two things. So the fascia course, if somebody doesn't really care about the science, they just want to start treating their fascia, the fascia course is just for you. It's 30 minutes of science. This is all you need to know. And it basically me saying, these are the rules you have to follow. Don't avoid my rules. You're going to hurt yourself if you avoid my rules. And then a 75-minute walkthrough of how to start treating your fascia for basically the first 6 to 9 months. We don't need to go past the hips. Until the lower body's released at 80%, we have to release the fabric of tension to get close to the spine. The dynamic breath work is, I'm trying to remember exactly the question that you asked because it was very specific.
Helping with snoring.
So snoring, okay, is often happening because we're mouth breathing, not nose breathing, right? Mm-hmm. And when we look at the tongue placement in the skull, the tongue, like there's no bone here at the bottom of the neck. So if we have a lazy tongue and the tongue just lays at the bottom of our mouth, we're going to eventually have a little gobbledygook. No way around it. Basic physiology. But if we learn how to lift the tongue and hold it there, we're fine. Now, the tongue is a muscle. So as we train the tongue can hold positions better and better and easier. So people who have snoring apneas, what I recommend more than anything is tongue exercises. And they look ridiculous. But to me, it's the simplest. Yes. So you go up and down to your extreme, side to side to your extreme, circle in one way, circle in the other way. You feel totally, I do it while I'm driving and I'm just like, oh God, I'm but it's a good spot to do it. You know, I can touch my.
Oh yeah, look at you.
I do them every day. If you relax the upper lip, you can gain like a little bit of a.
Okay. Like, I'll practice, then I'll come back in.
If somebody has a lot of facial tension, I super suggest, like, if you take your thumbs and rub them down the bottom of the jaw here. So like we're pushing into the skull on this side. If you find little tense spots, just hold those tense spots for 2 minutes and just kind of let them melt away. So like when we do tongue exercises, we're actually starting to use our tongue in different ways. So when we're speaking, when we're eating, we're using our tongue in the same motions over and over and over. And what happens, we actually build up a little tongue tension. And then if you have a lazy tongue and people are like, all the time, those are the people that snore. I live in South Florida where we have a huge elderly population and a really wealthy elderly population, which is hysterical because you think these people will be the happiest people in the world and they're not. And so you see the importance of health. You see the importance of being a champion in your own mindset and perspective. It's been such a privilege to witness it all. But these people have frontal lobe dementia, and frontal lobe dementia is foggy brain. It's putting your keys down and like having no idea where your keys went or like walking out of the door and being like, I don't know why I got there. So frontal lobe dementia affects the prefrontal cortex. Well, when we nose breathe, we're creating, people don't realize our nasal glands go all the way up here and all the way out here. So if your nasal glands are stuck, you can just do a face massage and start to open those tissues back up because our cilia fibers can actually lay flat. If we mouth breathe, we stop the vibration up here. And when we stop the vibration, this little booger snail, the mutoid gland, gets stuck and it stops cleaning. And then we experience stuckness and we're like, oh, we got to mouth breathe. And it's like, no, just play with your face.
I do a face massage every single morning. I do a whole lymphatic drainage, dry brushing. Yeah. So, and I keep saying there's something so important about the fascia because I do see somebody that does acupressure. And she's been my litmus test for how I'm doing in between. It's somebody else giving me feedback. Okay, this is what's going on with your body. But I'm like, man, if I could do fascia for a month, and I will. And I think it's actually highly beneficial. It's much more than people realize. It's much more important than anyone gives it any credit for. When you get to know your body and you take control of your health, and you no longer need to go see a doctor unless you've got a cut that needs sewing up. You guys, this is the new reality that we want to be in. We want to take control of our health. And I'm such a big fan. When I went and saw my doctor last time, I was like, I came just to talk to you. I didn't come for the schmear.
That's funny.
Right? It's like, She's like, oh my God, you have a rash. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been mountain biking. Right. It was just a really funny exchange. It was so funny. It could have been a comedy skit. I was just like, right. I don't need these things. I know I'm good.
Yeah.
And
When
then,
we're mhm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know if I completed that full thought. I get it's kind of in tangents because I get excited. And somebody with like you with like a big intelligent brain, it's just I love it. When we nose breathe, we're creating this vibration that's moving the brain fluid. So there's so much about tongue placement and proper breath that can free people up in their mind. When we add the fascia, I think a lot of things open. It's so cool that you're athletic because when you're an athlete, you relate to the fascia different. And like when you learn new stuff, because you feel the spring loadedness, and then you feel when the spring loadedness is not there, and you're like, what's wrong with me? Like I'm moving 30% slower today. Did I sleep wrong? And it's usually what I notice is it's stress. So when the stress is higher, I am not as bouncy. When my stress is low and my hydration is up and my sleep is good, like I can jump high, I can run fast, and I'm not sore. So before my 3-week experiment, my fascia was so clean that I could just work out and not be sore. And it was becoming this contest of just like, and do you remember that? Like, I remember that as a kid, being able to run 4 miles and having like older friends, and they're like, oh, I'd be so sore. And I'm like, sore? What do you mean sore? I don't get inflammation. I'm a kid, you know?
Right.
But I think we can reclaim that. I think, and then it just empowers the athlete because you're like, well, how hard can I pump? You know, before I get sore.
Right. No, it's absolutely true. No, and it's funny because I've tried so many different modalities per se. Pilates is probably what I do. Pilates, hiking, and then 10 to 20 minutes of really concentrated weights and then some stretching yoga moves. But I won't do anything like you put me on like, oh, you need to do this routine and follow. I do my own thing in Pilates. I'm like, she knows I won't follow the class. I'm doing me. I'm doing what my body needs.
Constant rebel. I love that.
Constant rebel. It's what brought me to where I am today. So, oh, this is so cool to connect with you. I'd love to chat with you for a few minutes after. Cool. I would love to have you back when Dave's available so he can learn more about this. And I would like to end with, if someone is feeling stress or anxiety, what is the first thing you would recommend them to do with the breath? In through the nose?
Oh, my 100% takeaway is the fastest way to get out of stress is to slow the breath down, specifically your exhale. So the way that we do that naturally is by humming. So hum with the tongue on the roof of our mouth as long as a hum as you can. And you maintain that for 4 minutes, you're going to pull your body back into a state of rest, kind of regardless of the situation. The most we can inhale and exhale through the nose, the better. And if we can inhale deeply, feeling like we're inhaling into the belly, we're really just triggering the diaphragm to drop. And then when the belly's full, inhale more air and try to expand into the upper chest. The upper chest is like the scuba tank for the lower body. So as a singer, if you wanted to learn how to belt, the belting comes from learning how to breathe into the lower body. Then you inhale, fill the back, sides, and chest. You expand to your maximum capacity. And then on your exhale, you push the air down. And what this does, gas naturally wants to rise. So it's unnatural for us to push the air down. People do it when they sigh by nature. But Whitney Houston, she would take these big dramatic breaths. And when she would hit the note, her arms slowly come down. And this is just giving her more control because she's actually using her intercostals. And our intercostals are laced differently. That's why we can do all this stuff. So she was actually like moving the intercostals to help her push the air down. And the more we can keep the air down into the lower lung field, the more oxygen gets pumped into the bloodstream. So at the smallest form, we hum to break the stress loop for 4 minutes. At the highest level, we push down while we do that. That's going to allow us to get to that 1 breath a minute space, which is real magic.
Yeah,
magic thing to
absolutely.
experience.
And so then my deep comment for everyone, and we'll finish off with this little bit of conversation, is that our DNA is affected by our frequency, which is our humming, our voice, our
Mhm.
toning. And as a singer, what is your take on that? I'm curious.
Oh, well, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Masaru Emoto's work, and he
Mm,
proved to me 10,000 times over, and to the world, I think that the study of cymatics, so how sound affects physical matter,
yeah.
is so essential. And in his research, like when you would go and get certified by him, he made every single person sing. And he's like, I don't care if you sing good or not. This has to do with charging the water that exists within you. We're 70% water. Water is influenced by thought and sound. And it proved over and over through the flash freezing and the micro disc. So when you say, I hate you to water, this is the structure. When you say, I love you, thank you, this is the structure. And me and my family, we recreated one of his experiments for 10 years. We did the rice experiment, in which we
Wow.
did
Okay.
the I love you, thank you, the I hate you, and ignore. And 10 years later, we were able to actually present him with the experiment. And it was about 6 months before he died. And one of those moments in life where you're like, this is a core memory.
Right?
So
Absolutely.
teaching people how to breathe is awesome. Teaching people how to hum is like that's the next level, because to me, sound, even sound, when you study the shape of sound on water, right? There's only so many vowels. Like even in all languages, there's only so many vowels that our vocal cords actually make. And our vocal cords are attached to the pelvic floor. They're made out of the mesoderm. So we grow from the top down electrically, then we grow from the bottom up in the tissue. And that's our pelvic floor and our vocal fold connection. Now, the vowels a, e, a, o, u, they shape. Vocal folds are two flaps of skin, and they make certain shapes, right? When we make vowel sounds, the structure that it has on the water is expansive. When we make consonant sounds, the structure collapses. So when you look at light language in the circular
Yes.
language,
Yes. That's where I'm going.
I can go down a path with like about Enochian and like how this all plays into this angelic nature, because divinity is a structure. Divinity is a beautiful symmetrical ordered structure. We can recreate that through sound, which is embellished onto the things. This is why, to me, somebody's like, what kind of chanting do you like? And I'm like, well, are we talking about like Bulgarian chanting, Tibetan chanting, Mongolian throat singing chanting? Are we talking about classic Catholic chanting in an acoustical space? So even chants themselves can sound so different in different spaces. Like the Mongolian chants often are done out loud in like natural. It's just, you can go down a whole rigmarole. But to me, it's all about vowel shapes in
Yes.
sounds, in acoustical settings. And really, my instruments, even, I'm very passionate about the fact that we're not doing frequency research right now on live instruments. We are using synthetic sounds that have been put through processors that are compressed. They're not real. Often they're not even in the frequency tuning that a natural acoustical instrument would be. And then in America, we're seeing the same popular music with the same backline, the same drummer, bass, guitar, a sexy singer.
Right.
But there's thousands of instruments that are played around the world that are microtonal, that actually exist on another scale. So to me, the next layer of healing, if you have someone that's on a table, right, and their fascia is clear and they actually know how to optimally breathe, and then we bring in sound, that's where I think we're going to make that next jump. It's a
Cool.
combo of these. We're just prepping the body.
Right. And I know, because the fact that you're a singer, and it's funny because I've been doing toning with my
Mm,
voice, with my throat. It's all I do when I'm outside, and I do the vowels. And you actually open a portal when you do the O, and then the A, and then the
yeah.
I, and then the O again to hold it open a little longer. Anyways, we're going to have lots of fun conversations.
Yes. It's so cool that you're playing with that. I don't think people realize like how. Can you feel the cavities that you're resonating off of?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay, so
yes.
Yeah, I'm starting to see more Americans starting to play with throat singing. I just watched a video today of a guy that did 4 overtones. And I'm like, this is when we understand all the sound is coming from the vocal cords, but it's
Yeah.
how we're resonating that vocal cords off the empty chambers of the body that allow us to produce frequency through the body. So the biggest,
Yeah.
best round singers, they're not just projecting the sound with their voice, they're projecting it through their whole system. They're resonating their whole cavity. That's why when I'm standing in a stairwell, I can kind of like, it feels like I can effortlessly hit these really big notes now. And it's so cool because I didn't used to be able to do that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, it's because I can literally feel the tone coming through my skull. And then that tone is projecting it. I mean, that's old school opera. Before we had speakers, the singer, I could only imagine what like
Right.
a 1700s opera style concert would have sounded like.
Right. And we're getting back to that. So we'll look forward to it. All right. I don't see any more questions, but definitely everyone's very interested and very fascinated. It's something we don't normally have on here, but as I've been diving more and more, and you'll have to meet Norma Stein too, because she's the same way. She's a didactic and is a lover of learning. And we all are really. I believe that's what humans are meant to be, is to follow whatever you're passionate about. Get out there and learn about it. Get to know you and get to know your body. And when you see what you do to your body through breath and for fascia, I really think you're going to be surprised how much better you feel overall. Yeah. Yeah. It's a gift. Yeah. Thank you for your time today. It was a super
Oh,
beautiful gift, Brooke. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the inspired conversation. And I hope that this is just the beginning of my journey. So I hope this is just about
Oh, yeah.
spreading all of the good, juicy, like, come on, guys, we can do it. We don't need to be told what to do. We can do it on our own. We can share the information together and we'll find our way to gamma.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Caroline. Beautiful. All right, you guys. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful night. We love you.